Man, I'm doing good. I'm so glad to link with you. You were doing big things, and I'm glad that we're able to collaborate and make magic happen, brother. Thank
Uh,
you for having me on the show.
of course, Scoop. Appreciate it, man. So you've been all over this Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving story. I know you cover the Nets up close, and you have a pretty good relationship, I think it's fair to say, with Kyrie Irving. So what do you make of what's happened here with the Brooklyn Nets the last 48 hours?
I think a word that my great grandmother would use would work very well in this conversation: the calamity. And when I look at the situation with the Nets, and when I look at the situation just with Kai and with Kevin, I think the thing that really stands out to me is I know a lot of people have used this empowerment NBA era as it relates to just guys that are stars and know what their worth is and knowing how to relate to owners. And I do think that this is a situation where Kevin and Kai know that they can go elsewhere or not play and or force their way out. And I know that, even back in maybe a couple of years ago as it relates to the Los Angeles Lakers, as it relates to Kevin Durant, in my reporting, I know that Kai had, or rather Kevin had, intimated that, the Lakers were a pretty legitimate option in his choice back then. And I do know that also with the Nets, Joe Tsai has heavily depended on the perception of Kai and more so Kevin as it relates to just culture at large. So when I look at this situation, I think really a reset has to be made. I know that the front office has been something that the Nets have really looked to move the needle. And I do also know that Kyrie is someone that really got Kevin to join the Nets. And so, you look at the situation, you look at, the future of Blake Griffin and, the Lakers and the Clippers are two teams that, could see conservatives. But I do think right now we're just in a leverage situation. I know, popular opinion would say, Russell Westbrook and Anthony Davis could go to the Nets in exchange for Kyrie Irving. But I think right now we're just looking at, players who draw in the income, really reaching back out to the owner and are kind of trying to find a way to make some things happen. I know that, at face value, just from just dialing the phone, the Mavericks, the Heat, as well as, the Phoenix Suns are popular opinions. Honestly, Jake, I'd like to see the Nets work this thing out. But I think it's going to take some work, some dialing back, and really utilizing the 4th of July weekend to kind of make some sort of headway into figuring out what they want to do next.
So, Scoop, do you think there's a chance they actually could make it work where maybe Durant will not ask for a trade and Kyrie opted in? They could actually, fix the relationship there?
I don't want to speak for Kev. I don't want to speak for Kai. But what I will say is just from conversations that I've had in between my vacation, kind of just trying to power down. The NBA is a long, long, long stretch, but just in brief conversations in text and just in phone conversations, I'd like to see them really try to figure this thing out. If you really take it back to, I think it was 2016 when Kevin ultimately made his decision to join the Warriors in free agency. Right? Am I right? It was 2016?
Sounds right. I think so.
Yep.
Okay. They used the Hamptons, Draymond and Steph Curry and some of the other, the brain trust within the Warriors organization. I really think they should utilize the 4th of July weekend the same way to kind of figure out what's next. I don't know if they're going to use the Jersey Shore. I don't know if they're going to use Martha's Vineyard, but utilizing, kind of just letting this freight train work itself out. What are next steps? I can tell you that, as much as the Nets, narrative has been, it's Kyrie Irving's fault, as it relates to Kevin, or rather James Harden, as it relates to James Harden and his relationship and just where it goes. I think that as much as you want to use Kyrie Irving for accountability, I think you need to look in the mirror and look at Steve Kerr and you look at Sean Marks as well. I know that Kyrie is an easy, bargain to look at him and say it's all his fault, but you got to kind of look at the whole full spectrum. And so I think the 4th of July weekend will be a great line of demarcation to figure out how the Nets could make it work. I mentioned the Mavericks and I mentioned the Phoenix Suns. The Miami Heat are another team that could be a play for either Kyrie or Kevin Durant. I think that ultimately both Kevin and Kyrie know their worth. They know what they can bring to an organization, and I don't think they're really rushing to kind of make magic happen on the Nets' part. I think this is a great halt to make those guys and the Nets brain trust figure things out collectively. I hope I answered your question.
Good stuff. Scoop, if the two sides can't work this thing out and ultimately, Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving are traded, we'll keep this focused on Kevin Durant right now because I feel like he's going to net the bigger return in a trade. What sort of feels like a most realistic trade package the Nets could get, and which team do you think has the assets that make the most sense to acquire Kevin Durant in a trade?
Well, I've been in touch with, various people who are familiar with DeAndre Ayton's thinking. I know that many people, at least on Nets Twitter, have talked about, that DeAndre Ayton. You notice that situation with the Suns hasn't totally been resolved. But when I look at that situation with the Nets, I know I tweeted something the other day, specifically with my sponsor, Bravada, where they talked about the Suns being a favorite in that conversation. You look at the trade that the Nets made with the Utah Jazz and acquiring Royce O'Neal, and you look at, I believe there was a first-round pick that was made available. And so when you look at that situation, number one, before I answer your question directly about Kevin Durant, if I'm Miami or I'm looking at Brooklyn, I'm looking at a possible situation where Miami could make both Tyler Hero, Kyle Lowry, and Nick Strauss available, as well as a first-round pick for Kyrie Irving and a second-round pick in the Miami situation. But then you look at the Nets situation, and then you look at the DeAndre Ayton thing. That has just been a conversation. I mentioned I tweeted that around late May. You can follow me on Twitter at ScoopB. I made something made public about the Nets' options as it relates to Kevin Durant. I know that popular theory suggests that not only would the Suns and the Portland Trailblazers be something of discussion if the Nets were to make a trade, but they've got a lot of leverage as far as picks, first and second round picks, protected picks, and what have you. I'm not necessarily a draft expert, so I don't want to paint myself with that brush, but I do think that the Nets do have enough first and second round pick leverage that they could make something happen. But I'll reiterate that I do think that the Nets, Kyrie Irving, Kevin Durant, could have a conversation with Sean Marks and Steve Nash and Joe Tsai and try to make something that is palatable in both realms to kind of dial back expectations for trades and really have a powwow, heart-to-heart, if you will, and really get to the root of the problem. And when I look at the root of the problem with the Nets, I think it's just fast talking and no real resolution in this regard. You look at the situation with the trade deadline. They got Ben Simmons at the trade deadline, and he didn't play. Mental health has always been something of a hot-button issue that people have discussed. James Harden ultimately left Brooklyn because he and Steve Nash, from what I'm told, just did not get along. And so you don't want this to continue to be a problem, so you cut that at the root. You really get to the Kevin Durant and Kyrie issue. How can we make this situation better? How can Sean Marks, Kyrie Irving, Kevin Durant, Steve Nash be one and make that happen? I know I reported back in the springtime that Ben Simmons was a lot of Nets players were walking. We looked at Ben Simmons and felt that he was, confident in his practice and was walking around confidently like a certain Hall of Famer. I think Michael Jordan is what I said, but I really do think that it's just really a meeting of the minds. The Nets still do have a big three, and Ben Simmons, Kyrie Irving, and Kevin Durant. I really would like to see them figure it out again. Names like Dallas, names like the Miami Heat, as well as the Phoenix Suns are names that I'm hearing in the chase to potentially get Kevin Durant. I wouldn't rule out an opportunity for the Chicago Bulls and a return to the Golden State Warriors. But I do think that when you look at the Nets, you look at Kai, look at Kevin, they do have more leverage in this in this situation than the Nets do. The Nets cut the checks. The Nets direct the culture. And I do think that that Kai and Kevin are in a situation where it's unprecedented territory. And I also do think that when the collective bargaining agreement comes about, there's going to be a tug and a pull with the Nets and or rather a collective. There's going to be a tug and pull with the owners and the NBA Players Association, because the Nets, or in this situation, the players do hold the cards. They fill seats, but the owners, or the governors, as they say now, do get the revenue. So I think the Nets are a classic example of players kind of guiding the narrative in this situation.
He's Brandon Scoop B. Robinson. You can follow his Twitter account at Scoop B, NBA insider and reporter for Bally Sports. Scoop,